Welcome back for another study of the lectionary. We are now at what would be the fourth Sunday after the Epiphany, and it is on that Sunday that you could, there are Epiphany 4 texts out there, but many churches will be using the text for the purification of Mary and for the presentation of Jesus. And so that's going to be the text that we're going to use today for our study.
Extra special.
Yes. Which means, and you'll know if your church is doing the purification because they will have probably changed the parament colors back again they went from white to a couple of weeks of green. And now they're going to go back for white and then go back for green. Your altar guild probably wishes you would do Epiphany 4, because then they could just stay green. But again, we would change that back to white on that day.
Plus, you get to watch carefully if you're in church early. See if the pastor comes out with the wrong color on and then ducks back and then has to come out. Check. It's always the fun part.
Not like we've ever done that before.
No.
Yeah. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the gospel first, mainly because the gospel you are probably more familiar with than even the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. The Old Testament text, while being familiar, it's more the gospel. It's one that you've heard often. And if your church is when I would use the term liturgical church, or a church that follows the formats of our ancient liturgies, you'll see some of that liturgy, especially the post-communion liturgy, coming out in this text.
You've got it memorized, and you probably have a melody or two attached to it.
Absolutely. I know that I do.
Yes.
I know I have my favorites in there. So what we're going to do is we are going to go to Luke chapter 2. Mm-hmm. And in Luke chapter 2, we are going to get to verse 22 of Luke chapter 2. And I'm going to read it, and then Pastor Shim, you just dive in with things that I've missed, because there's some really neat stuff here.
All kinds of fun.
Okay. So we will begin. And when the time came for their purification according to the law of Moses, I love that term, when the time came. There's significance to those words right there. Now, of course, when the time came here is a specific time in the based off of God's commands, his ceremonial laws, not the ones that have been created by, not the fake ones that were created by the Pharisees and the rest of the church. These are God's ceremonial laws, and so it's when that appropriate time came. But we see that terminology at all times when it comes to the Christ, don't we? When his birth was announced, it's when the time came. When it was ready for him to be born, and the time came when his mother was ready to give birth. We'll see that. Oftentimes we've seen Jesus. In fact, we saw it last week at the wedding at Cana. Remember?
Yes.
At the wedding at Cana, when mom says to him, "There is no wine," and he says, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My time has not yet
My hour
come."
has not yet come.
Yeah.
But then he does it anyway.
The
Sherman Parkers had a long debate about that on this last
Oh,
Sunday.
really?
It was all
Okay.
kinds of fun.
Yeah.
Long debate.
Yeah.
He says his hour has not yet come, but then he does it anyway. And what is this hour?
But
so much fun.
we also see that, don't we, throughout his ministry, there are going to be times when they are going to want to harm him or kill him or whatever the case may be. he's always not. I mean, he slips through the cracks. He is gone from their sight, whatever the case may be, because his time has not yet come. And then we come to as we enter toward Holy Week, he'll have been coming off of the Mount of Transfiguration, and he will speak of the fact that the time of the Son of Man has come. And so that terminology is used all throughout the Scriptures, pointing to the Messiah.
And the planning of God and the exact, God is very on time. There's that, probably a verse you have memorized or kind of paraphrased, memorized of with all this stuff in the world, at the right time Christ died for us, the godly for the ungodly.
Yes.
And it's this very much, God is so aware of all the details. It's exactly the right moment for exactly every little detail of his plan to happen correctly according to his will.
Yes. And so as we read this, I don't want you just to skim over those words, because you could do an entire devotion study at home. There could be a sermon series on the time of Jesus.
The time. Was the right time.
What the right times and the wrong times. I mean, there's or a whole Bible study. There's so much you can do on the right time. So when the time came for their purification according to the law of Moses, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. So what does it mean by their purification? Well, we know a couple of things happen after a birth. The mom has to be purified because she is unclean. And the son is to be consecrated or to be given over to God, the firstborn, especially.
Redeemed, bought back.
Bought back, exactly. Now, obviously, this purification, the purification of the mom, happens not just after the pregnancy. It really happens throughout her lifetime, because as we go through the woman's menstrual cycles, when she has gone through a menstrual cycle, it means that she has externally bled. And because she has bled, because there was shed blood, it means that there must be a purification, because the blood being shed would have made the individual unclean. And so you'll see that throughout all of the Old Testament, that if there was any form of a shedding of blood, there would have to be a cleansing that would go with it. Well, as we think about that happens with a woman in her cycles for forever, and so she must be then deemed to be clean. She must be. There would be a purification, a sacrifice, of a cleansing sacrifice of that type of nature, and that would be very important, because if she wasn't cleansed, if she wasn't made ceremonially clean, she could not be in the presence of not just God but of man. So she couldn't be in public courtyards. She couldn't be in at the temple. All of those kinds of things. So she needed to be purified, and with that purification would always come sacrifice. And for someone that was of impoverished status, it would mean a dove or turtle dove or pigeons or whatever the case may be. Yeah. The least expensive animal that they could purchase. God
made provision for those who didn't have the kind of income that they had cattle out back. And for men and women, both men and women lose fluids. And I'll just stop there. I'm used to talking to middle school kids.
Sure.
No details, but both men and women lose fluids. And in one way, you could sort of sum it up at least in a sort of a picture way, life is leaving the body. Shed blood, life is in the blood.
Life is in the blood.
And so even something positive, marriage is positive, and the consummation of it is a gift of God. Births are positive. So this isn't like, oh, you did something wrong or evil. But in our state dealing with sin, life is leaving the body. Fluids of life are leaving the body. Becomes a sort of a picture of a miniature death, or a hint of the problems after the fall. And so right away, God is in there with, he's cleansing it, he's fixing it, he's restoring this life. So it's a very regular rhythm for the Jews, a male and female.
Absolutely.
This was a part of life.
The same thing would have happened. There would have been a cleansing during our purification during the time of the circumcision. Same thing.
Snip, snip.
All of that would have happened. And I think that's really important as we talk about that life is in the blood. I mean, we always say, well, when the heart stops pumping or when the brain stops functioning, then there is death. But there really is the reason that is the case is that the blood stops moving through the body, and so it becomes that's when death occurs. And it also tells us this, that bleeding, any shedding of blood whatsoever, is a product of sin. That while man was created to be filled with blood, he was not created for shedding it. And that's as simple as, a bloody nose when you fell off your bike, or a pinprick when you get a booster shot, or anything along the lines.
One of our profs, Dr. David Scare, loved to put this in our mind. It's when your kid fell down and knocked their forehead against the step or the corner. That's why you went ballistic, because blood is supposed to be in the body, not out of it.
Not out of the body.
And we get a dramatic reaction when blood is outside the body. It's like, nope, that's not supposed to be what occurs. That's not how it's supposed to be.
And in the church or at during this time, when that blood would be shed, it would make someone unclean, and so they needed to be purified or cleansed or welcomed back into the family of God. So it would be done during this period of purification. So that is why, now according to this law of Moses, they bring him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, as it is written in the law of the Lord. Every male who first opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. Now, interesting that every male will be presented to or consecrated to the Lord. That isn't just every male human. That was even the firstborn of the animals. So if you had goats or sheep, the firstborn of the mama was also presented to the Lord. And note where it's being presented. It is being presented at the temple. So it also means that they have to take a journey wherever they live to the temple. And so it is at the temple where all of this will happen. Isn't it interesting? It is only at the temple where cleansing occurs.
Yeah, very specific. Yeah, does this sound familiar? Does this apply to us now?
Does this? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So where does where is our cleansing? Where does our cleansing occur for our shed blood or for our uncleanness or our sinfulness? It happens here in church. And that cleansing happens in the waters of baptism. It happens in the proclamation of the word. It happens in the absolution. And it happens in Holy Communion.
Our sinful blood tainted and we're unclean and would end in death and the loss of our. So we have pure blood put into us, a different blood, a shed that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Instead
Yes.
of condemning us, it buys us back.
So what we see here is the purification of Mary according to the law of Moses, right? We see where this would have happened for her monthly, and then of course at the birth, it happens for us weekly, or every time we gather in the Lord's house, weekly, right?
Yep.
That's all of you. There are none of you that are Christmas and Easter people. I'm certain of that.
Amen.
You would be weekly.
Always.
And so it is there. Your purification happens all the time. So that's an application to you from this. And so offered sacrifice according to what's said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Now, there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon. And this man was righteous and devout. Righteous and devout means that he would have been a Jew, not a Gentile. That would be part of it. And also, it also means he was a faithful Jew, right? And what does it mean for him to be a faithful Jew? It means that he believed God was sending a Messiah.
Yeah.
And so he believed that Messiah was going to restore us to God. Yeah. Okay, that's what it means to be righteous and devout. Okay.
Yeah, every now and then you get the phrases like they're looking for the kingdom or waiting for the kingdom or waiting for the anointed one.
Right.
And that's a nice thing to remember. They have not simply gone the way of the Sadducees and simply a political position of power with empty rituals or a purely personal pietistic devotional like some of the Pharisees. No, they're still messianic.
Yes.
They're still focused on the Messiah who is to come.
So when you see the word righteous and devout, again, remember that to be they are people of faith in believing that in the Messiah God. It's not a self-righteousness. It's not a man-made righteousness. And none of that. This is what it means. And again, they go on to say exactly what you said. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel. He was waiting for the restoration of Israel. That's what that is. That's what it means. And it says, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. And again, that's a statement of faith. The same thing with you and with me. The Holy Spirit is upon us, as you know. He enters you in the waters of baptism, and he's upon you. Here, I think what we can understand a little better is that the Holy Spirit it says that it has been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he has seen the Lord's Christ. So what this does mean is that Simeon did receive some form of a revelation. Whether that revelation was in the form of a dream, was it a sent angel? We don't know any of that, and really that is not, the how is not really relevant because God doesn't tell us. But what it does say is that it's been revealed to him that he would not see death before he has seen the Lord's Christ, and in this case he means that he will have seen the Lord's Christ face to face. I mean, the same thing has happened for you and for me. We have seen the Lord's Christ, but we have seen him veiled. We haven't seen him face to face and eye to eye. It appears in this text that the Holy Spirit has promised Simeon that he will see him with his own eyes. Okay? And he came in the Spirit into the temple. And verse 27, so what does that mean? That means that the Spirit led him to be in the temple on that day. Now, did he receive a special revelation from the Spirit that said, Simeon, you need to be in the temple today? Or was this simply the same calling that the Spirit leads you into the temple each week by waking you up and saying, Ben, it's Sunday. Or something along those lines. It could be as simple as that he was led to be in the Lord's house, because this would have been a normal day that he would have been in the Lord's house, and he didn't ignore that calling. So you and I get that calling all the time. But there are those who choose to ignore it. And there are some that choose they would rather sleep in, or go to the lake, or go to a hockey game with their kids, or put anything else in front of being in the Lord's house. Here we see that Simeon didn't put anything before being in the Lord's house. I think Psalm 84, right? Which is the psalm that's appointed for here. I love being in your temple, Lord. There's no other place I would rather be than be in the temple of my God. That type of an understanding, and that certainly is where we see Simeon. And as he came in the Spirit in the temple, when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him according to the custom of the law. So, of course, we have the purification of Mary. We also have now this presentation to present Jesus, to consecrate him to the Lord. He takes up Jesus in his arms, and he blesses God, and he says, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel. So, when Simeon takes the Christ into his arms, did the Spirit say, this is he? What was it that led Simeon to say, here is the Christ? This is really a very similar picture that we see when Jesus and John were still in the womb. And when Jesus' mother hears, or when John's mother, Elizabeth, hears Mary's voice, John leaps in the womb. And it's the same as we see Simeon, and John is saying, here is the Christ. And in the same way, here is the Christ. And so the same thing happens for us as we take up the Christ. We don't take him up in our arms, but we do take him into our hands and then into our mouth, or in some churches directly into the mouth. They may not set it in your hand, but as you partake of Holy Communion, does your mind and your heart, does it say, Lord, now you are letting your servant see the Christ? Because that's what's happening at that time.
Yeah, this is your salvation.
This is your,
yes.
yes.
I have seen your salvation.
I have seen your, and that is why that's why we sing this hymn at the end of Holy Communion. You would recognize it as the Nunc Dimittis, the go in peace and in the favor of God. And we all have our own versions that we like of it. I know mine, and so this is what it is saying, and why we do it at the end of the church service, because the same thing that happens with Simeon is happening with us. And that is that we are touching, whether with our hands in our mouths or just with our mouths, we are touching, we're taking up God. And we bless God and we say, now we can go in peace. We have seen the Lord. We have, it's really a magnificent statement.
Great joy. And on your Google machines, you can look for images or paintings of Simeon and Simeon's song. Different artists have been very inspired by this. And there's some of the most joyful paintings of this old man holding this baby and singing for joy. And, it's a phrase common to what we still use. Something absolutely wonderful happens, and we say, oh, now I can die happy. And very often, it can be connected to something wonderful happened to our loved ones. We know our loved ones are safe, happy. We know that something so great has happened. Now I can die happy. This is wonderful. The Lord has done it. I don't have to worry about it. This is great. And let your servant depart in peace. I can die happy. This is wonderful. The salvation has come. God's in charge. The victory is won. I don't have to worry. It's all completed.
Yes.
In that way. It's all completed in the coming of the Messiah and the great joy that he has. And in this prophecy, it's glory for the people of Israel. Remember, the first Christians are Jews. Also, he says, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, following those parts of the Old Testament prophets that say, this is going to be in all the earth.
Yes.
And nations will come to the brightness of his rising, and the Gentiles are going to get to ride in on the coattails.
I think that's the other piece of this that is so amazing, is that Simeon then, in a prophetic way, speaks that this Messiah, because this would not have been taught to him, at least not directly in the law of Moses. But Simeon recognizes that this light, that this Messiah, is for more than just the Jews. That it is for the Messiah of the whole world.
You compare that with like some of the Old Testament readings of the last 2 weeks, the last two recordings we did. That highway of salvation goes out into all the nations.
Yes.
And they all come to the cross of Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we see that here. Simeon, again, is professing that the Christ is for all people, which is really the theme of Epiphany, isn't it? I mean, it's one of the major themes, anyways, of Epiphany.
Light shining forth.
Yeah, and the Christ for all nations. That's where you could actually end the text there, but then they give some alternate reading if you wanted to continue on. And so if we continue on with the alternate reading, and his father and his mother marvel at what was being said about him. So again, do they marvel that another person has recognized what they already know? Or do they marvel because maybe they don't understand it in its fullest yet? Whatever the case may be.
Does it keep being revealed or further revealed? It's such a momentous thing. Can the human mind really get all of it in one?
So this would be another one of those things that Mary would have pondered in her heart. Okay?
Yeah.
So, and Simeon blesses them. So here now, Simeon's blessing goes from God to them. And really that is... Isn't that a fulfillment of the law? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so you see this blessing coming from Simeon to the both and there. And so we see that. And Simeon blesses them. And then he says to Mary, his mother, behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed. And so here again, Simeon prophesies the fact that that this amazing revelation is going to also be fraught with sorrow and with that it's in for a battle, that they're in for a battle, and that they're not all will believe what is being said.
Yeah, and another reminder, like Hebrews, that not just because you're biologically belonging to a group does that mean that you believe and trust what God says. The rising of many in Israel and the falling of many in Israel. You have King David who does trust and believe what God says, even though he's a sinner. You have Saul eventually who doesn't want to go along with what God says. And you have all these Israelites who do follow Jesus and are witnesses of the resurrection, and they are the church, and the Gentiles get added in more later. You also have the Jews right away. It's like people have two reactions to Jesus. They love him or they hate him.
Yep.
And to this day, people love him or they hate him, and some want nothing to do with him.
And there really is nothing in between. You either believe or you don't.
Yeah.
It's this is really a yes/no question.
Yeah.
It's not a question that has a large gray area,
Right.
because that area in between are all versions of no.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a lot of versions of no. There's only yes, he really is the Lord. He really is the Messiah.
Yeah.
He tacks on, so that thoughts from many hearts may be revealed.
Yes.
When we encounter the Messiah, it's only then that we find out who we are.
Yes.
Are we those who will admit helplessness and sin and love to be saved, and he's really, really God? Or, nope, I want to be my own God, and I want him to leave me alone and go my own way.
Yeah.
And it reveals my heart.
And so again, you're right. It reveals, and that will be made evident. And again, you can see this, that he is speaking not just of Gentile people, but he's also speaking of his own tribe.
Yeah.
That their heart, the true heart, is going to be revealed in this, and so I think that's and we see that, of course, throughout Jesus' ministry, and not just through his earthly ministry, but also to this day. Those words are still very alive today. So that is we can scan through the next part a little bit. There's also this prophetess. It says Anna. She's the daughter of Phanuel, the tribe of Asher. So we also see here is a woman who is part of one of the tribes of Israel. She's advanced in years, having lived with her husband 7 years from when she was a virgin, and then a widow till she's 84. And it says, she did not depart from the temple, worshiping with fasting and prayer night and day. So she made this was her entire life, was in the temple. Now, what this also probably tells us is that all of this would have happened in the court of the women. It would not have happened up in the temple proper because of two reasons. And those two reasons are Mary and Anna. They would not have been allowed past the court of women. And so all of this probably took place down in that court, which would be just inside of the court of the Gentiles. Mm-hmm. So it basically would go from the outer gates to the court of the Gentiles, where us folks would have been in.
Us folks would be way out there.
Then you would have had, and then you would have had the court of the women, which is where you'd have the women, and I think you would have the children in that court too.
I believe that's right.
And then there was another inner gate, and then there would have been another inner court where you would have, you would have had some of the men, and then you would have first gotten into the first section of the temple. And it would be at that first section of the temple we would have the cleansing basin and all of those things as you would step into the temple, and obviously takes you all the way to the Holy of Holies. But you're right, it is, there's various areas, and you only go just as far as that area allowed you to go. So because those two women were here, there's a good chance that all of this took place in that court of the women. And so we would have had that. She was fasting with prayer there day and night. And coming up at that very hour, she began to give thanks to God and to speak of him to all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. Now, it doesn't say that she encounters the Christ here. Did you notice that? It just says, and coming up at that very hour, she began to give thanks to God. So was this happening at the very same time, or did she actually encounter the Christ in the same way that Simeon did?
That's interesting. I've never heard anyone ask that before.
I don't know. I didn't think of it till just now.
The words coming up.
Coming up.
That's where I've always taken the assumption. If I'm telling a story about you at the county fair, and he was in the dairy barn, and it was wonderful, and he had the milkshake. And then Ben came up, and now the words coming up sound like
came up to, or was it just the time of the day that she comes up to the temple, because she's there day and night, but then, that doesn't mean she was there 24 hours a day. It means she was there day and night. Does it mean that this all happened about the hour when she came up to the temple? I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't really say, but what it does say is she is giving thanks to God. She's speaking of him. Now, is the hymn of the Christ or of the Messiah to come? It could be
with the
to all who are waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. But it is in the context. And I'm not saying that it's not the case. I'm just saying it's not. We don't see her interaction in the same way as we do Simeon. It's not. We don't see her, let me hold him too. Any of that kind. We don't know that. It could be that she is there at the same time. Maybe she's there right over Simeon's shoulder. Maybe they know each other because they're both in the temple so often.
Likely.
We don't know any of that, but what we do know is that that Anna was there, and she is proclaiming the same proclamation, the same confession. I think that would be the best thing. Anna is in church, the part of church she could be in, and she is making the same confession that Simeon is making.
And she gets the emphasis of where she's continually, going around in the temple, speaking to all. Who were waiting to the. So she's giving this message very boldly to everyone who's around.
She's like one of the shepherds that were in the fields on that Christmas.
Yeah,
where they all, or like the Samaritan woman at the well, who goes back into her village and
the whole village
tells everyone,
letting them know. Yeah, so she's speaking of him to all, and again, who are waiting for the redemption of Israel, the buying back of Israel. They're all of those who are still focused in on the Messiah's coming, the Messiah's coming, the Messiah's coming.
Yeah.
They haven't given up on that.
Right.
Just like earlier in the paragraph, waiting for the consolation of Israel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the last two verses that are part of our text. And when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord. So here we see Jesus even before he is able to perform these acts of the law, these laws of the Lord on his own. It's being performed he's still fulfilling all of the law. And so when they had performed all of this, it says they returned into Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. So they go back home. That's not really necessarily saying that they're just going back home, because we're reminded that Jesus, after his birth, he was Joseph was told in a dream to go to Egypt. Is this something where Jesus was went to their home in Nazareth after the Bethlehem cradle, and then later on to Egypt, and then back home? Or is this something where maybe he's coming to his home in Nazareth for the first time?
Or is this occurring actually before the Magi?
Or before the Magi?
Usually...
Well, probably you're right. Before the before the Magi. So is it that their return is this? Did they go to the temple first before they went to Nazareth? Or did they go from Bethlehem to Nazareth back to Jerusalem? Scripture doesn't say, but it's one of those things where he's returned to Galilee, to his town, to his hometown. And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. And so what does that mean? It means that he was raised in the love and admonition of the Lord. It means that he was, the devotions were at home, the teaching, the weekly in the synagogue, all of everything that was a part of the life of the faithful Jews. So that's what we see. Anything else you wanted to throw in there before we go to the next text?
No, just that with both Simeon and Anna, it's neat how God often shoots up these flags when he's doing something important, and people are getting this information. There's this muddy area during the life of Jesus on earth when, well, how many people have already heard that he's the Messiah? How many are faithfully waiting for the Messiah, but they didn't get the newspaper yet? How many are, and there's this interesting, Old Testament believing forward to God's promise, New Testament more believing backwards to the event of the Messiah. And during his life, there's this interesting muddy area of how many are saved by God because of their faith in his promise, even if they passed away when Jesus was 3 years old and they hadn't heard of him yet. He was there, but they were still waiting. But the trust is in God's promise. Whether they've been able to see him with their own face or whether they missed him by that much, we would say, or any of this, it's the same promise. And Hebrews, again, kind of goes back to that, trusting the same promise as Father Abraham did, that this is. But some, even before his public ministry after his baptism, Anna's let him know, if you were standing by when Simeon sang out, okay, you heard, this specific one is the Messiah.
Interesting. As you described it, in the way you described it, it reminds me of one of the challenges that was faced by the Thessalonian church. In the Thessalonian church, there were those that were waiting for the second coming, the second coming, and they were concerned because there were those of them, there were those of their family that were dying, and did they miss it?
Right.
And so Paul had to share that message with them, that exact same message that you just shared here, he shares with them, the do not be afraid message. And so that was really Anna's message, is that, you do not be afraid. The Messiah, that the promised Messiah has come.
And you're saved by it. Whether this or that incident has occurred in the 1 year coming up for the epistle this Sunday, it concludes, and the righteous will live by faith. And what's our other word for faith? Trust.
Yes.
Trusting God's promise because he says so, and Abraham believes it and is saved long before Jesus is ever born.
Yeah.
And you get the same salvation.
We had a pretty detailed discussion on that a few months ago in our study of the lectionary. Do you remember? On that other word for faith, which was trust. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at with the gospel lesson. So where would you like to take us now?
Well, let's go to our Old Testament. You know, it's good to see. I think the Old Testament will give you some fairly clear parallels to what's going on, and this faithfulness of being in the Lord's house, and also the firstborn. We get to talk about Samuel and Hannah, and her lesser-known husband Elkanah. I always think of an elk when I hear that word. It helps me remember the name, and that's in the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 2. And
I'll just give you a little heads up. We have about 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, 15 minutes.
Okay, so I think we're in good shape.
We're in good shape.
We're in good shape, but I wanted to give you just kind of a...
That even gives me an
up.
extra second to say I lied. It's chapter 1, not chapter 2. Yeah. And we take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 1, starting at verse 21. And on your own time, you can read a little ahead, too. Context is always good. We have this theme through the Bible already by 1 Samuel. This starts to just sound so familiar that this particular woman could not bear children. And this was a great sorrow in her life.
Yeah.
And there's a theme. One of our profs, Dr. Pulse at seminary, he loved to talk about motifs.
Yes, he did.
And as a music major, I like picking up, we taught, that's our musical word too, for
Sure.
patterns.
Patterns.
So he said before, we could do a whole series of Bible studies just on the right time, not the right time. You could do a whole devotion. Well, that would be a motif.
Yes.
A theme or a pattern. We're going to keep the same idea. You can have garment motifs. When did God clothe people?
Gosh, yes.
You can have going up to mountains or going down to valleys motifs. You can write a whole book about that. So many different patterns. About the sacrifice motif is always so huge for us.
Yes.
But there's this whole, through the Bible, pattern of the barren womb motif.
And think about how significant that is. What was the Lord's instruction to his people? He said, be fruitful and multiply and cover the earth. That was his command. The command to follow the Torah, the laws of God, that came much later. But the original command of God to his people was, and it was after they came off the ark, was be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And so the barren womb would have been seen from the outside and would have felt from the inside as being a disobeying of God or a punishment of God.
Across human time, humans cannot resist the urge to turn a gift of God into a version of legalism.
Absolutely.
Into even a form of bullying. Or the idea, I was just reading about this last week, that somehow anything that goes wrong...
Or to tell God what God means.
To tell God what God means. Or to think of anything bad as God is initiating some punishment on you. Humans, whatever continent you're on, whatever century you're in, it's just humans can't stop doing that.
That's right.
And in our little playpen of community, we take swaps at each other. And it's already a great hardship. So often we read about a woman grieving because her womb is closed. God has not opened her womb, to use their more poetic language. She has the barren womb. She wants to have children. She'd love to have children. And especially in this culture, it's all the more emphasized as a blessing of the Lord. And to not be able to participate in that is a great grief. And so many have absorbed it as the meaning of their life, and now their whole meaning of life and purpose in the Lord's plan is taken away, and has God forsaken me? So many people in your village have forsaken me because they're being jerks about it on top of the grief. And we have another one. I mean, there was Sarah, Abraham's wife. There was Rachel, Jacob's wife. Elizabeth in the New Testament. So often. And one of the interesting things, these wombs that are not able to bear, that's where God does extra miraculously amazing things. Just like so often, it's actually the younger brother that God wants winds up blessing more than the older brother who traditionally inherits. God is using those who are weak in themselves, confronted with the sinfulness of this life, and he gives a greater blessing. Barren wombs in the Bible often produce miracle babies. It's incredible. And you get that theme going here. Starting at verse 21, the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow, but Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned. Now this is after, again, you can read this before. She was grieving that she couldn't have one, and the Lord heard her prayer, blessed her. The barren womb has a miracle baby. Okay, this is great. So now she does have this joy. But Hannah says to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. Earlier on, she had made that vow, if you will only give me this child, in a nutshell, I'll give him back to you. And this isn't only presenting him to the Lord and then taking him back home with the redemption process, but this is God's child, and he'll be used to be his servant in his presence forever. He'll dwell in the presence of the Lord forever. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word, which that would be a good verse to meditate on a lot. The Lord is the one who makes his word come true, makes his blessings come true, makes his prophecies come true. Whatever it is we're thinking, whatever it is we're doing, whatever situation we're in, only may the Lord establish his word. He is the truth teller. That's why we say amen, because it means true, truth. God is the one who makes this happen. And I know we don't have that many minutes here, but he says, yeah, let the Lord establish his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull. It seems they had more property than Joseph and Mary.
Yep.
They were better
off. A little
off.
wealthier.
Yeah, an ephah of flour and a skin of wine, and she brought them to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. They weren't in Jerusalem yet at this point. And the child was young. I'm just a bachelor. How old are kids when they're weaned? Is that 1, 2, 3? 1, 2?
No, yeah, before 1.
Before, okay, he's a dad. Okay, I need help with this stuff.
Just wait, the messages are going to come my way. You don't know a thing.
I'm only a bachelor. I need help from people.
I don't remember.
These things, I have to call up the parents, you know. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull. There's that sacrifice, a life for a life. The sinner is redeemed and given new life in the Lord because the sacrifice has happened, and of course that happens for us. The life is in the blood, specifically Jesus' blood, and we're given that life. And they brought the child to Eli, the priest. And she said, "Oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who is standing here in your presence, praying to the Lord," who initially he thought she was drunk. She was babbling away in her prayers to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there. And so now this child is not only presented, but is presented, and you are the Lord's servant.
Yeah.
And Samuel, becomes a great figure in Israel and is a priest of the Lord and also kind of a prophet. He sort of fulfills both roles as he's going with this. And he is representing God to his people, and he's serving in the temple day and night. And it's interesting that right after the paragraph about Jesus is presented in the temple, well, later on, well, they visit the temple and Jesus stays there. And Mary and Joseph try to go home, and where's the kid? And you weren't watching, and I thought you had, and all those discussions. And I had to be in my Father's house.
Right.
And Jesus is the Son totally given to the Father for his work, but also miraculously given to us. And he is the one who speaks from the Father to us, and he gives us the true word of the Lord. The word of the Lord is established. He is the word of the Lord. He is always doing his Father's work. It is day while he is with us. He is always doing the work of salvation. Revelation, see, I am making all things new. And so it's just interesting as you compare back and forth the experiences. One of all of these women who had a womb that should not have given birth, in a way, including Mary's. She shouldn't have been pregnant. There's no way. There's no way that that womb should have had a baby in it.
Nope.
But the miracle baby theme is there, and this God has given the miracle baby, but this Son, and with Jesus, the Son of Man, an incredible title, is in full-time service to the Lord, and he has done all things well.
So that way, as you take a look at it, as you mention it in those words, you have the barren womb here, you have Mary's womb that should not have bore a child because there was no sexual encounter, any of those things. That would tell us, based off of, everything that we know about the scriptures, is that Samuel would have been a typology of, or a motif of, the Christ.
The Christological figure.
Absolutely, and that is, and the one who is devoted, like you said, devoted day and night to the Lord's Lord's church, and so that again, as we talk about the scriptures always pointing to the Christ, that's how you can see this text, is that it is kind of a picture language, or a typology would be, one of my other professors would use that term all the time, and I love that term, of the Christ. So
Very, very interesting. How many minutes do we have?
3 to 4, yeah, you got,
3 or 4?
yeah, if you want.
Well, just to throw it out for you, because I don't, with just the little amount of time we have left kicking around, there is this pattern also. You have this faithful woman who is uttering her prayers before the Lord, putting her trust in the Lord. You have Hannah. You have some little about a comparison not only with Mary, but even the prophetess Anna. She's in the temple of the Lord praying day and night constantly. Like, Anna was praying so hard, but the priest Eli thought she was tipsy.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Why are you babbling so much? Go home. And just sticking with where the Lord is, being in the Lord's house, and with Anna and boy, their names even rhyme, Hannah and Anna, and with her being in the Lord. What did it say? She was 80 years old.
84.
84 years old. From the time she was a virgin, she could have been anywhere, 13, 14, 16,
Sure.
whatever. And her husband died after only 7 years. She probably lived a life of immense hardship.
Right.
Generally, the women can't own property, at least in regions.
Right.
You have this going on, possibly a life of poverty. And yet the only thing is to be in the house of the Lord. He's the only source. He's the only source of the blessing, the only source of the good. And if there was more time, to play with, what do you do with Joseph and Elkanah, the husband of Hannah? What do you do with comparing Hannah and the prophetess Anna? How could this relate to Simeon's song? Any of those details. And in my life, I've gotten to meet these amazing Christians, whether male or female, that very much their life is intensely focused on the house of the Lord, the family of God, the blessings received of the Lord, dedicated to prayer in a way that puts me to shame.
Again, the psalm appointed for this week, Psalm 84, right? How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts.
Yeah.
My soul longs, yes, faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and flesh sing for joy to the living God. I think you can see the connection there to both of these texts.
Yeah.
Exactly what you were saying, right?
Yeah.
A day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. Yeah.
My maternal Grandma Rush, that
Probably
was
30
her
seconds.
favorite verse, I think. I don't
Really?
know how many times